Let's start this story back in 1995. Pittsburghers were fanatical about Mario Lemieux, who had just scored his 500th career goal for the Penguins. They had just said goodbye to Mayor Sophie Maslov and were welcoming the new mayor, Tom Murphy. And at Kennywood, you could still ride the Steel Phantom, the world's fastest roller coaster. The good old days. But were they really? For 100 years, steel had made Pittsburgh an industrial powerhouse. Then, in the 1970s, it all began to collapse. By the time we get to 1995, 75% of the steel formerly made in Pittsburgh was now made somewhere else. Unemployment skyrocketed, and the workers were forced to move away.
The city had lost 60% of its population when I was becoming mayor, and you can imagine if you've lost 60% of your population, you don't have a lot of money.
With the city's budget in freefall, it looked everywhere for places to cut. First on the chopping block, maintenance of its vast acreage of parks.
I started working in the park system in 1974, but I can remember in the 80s and 90s, nobody was in the parks.
It was benign neglect. So it wasn't necessarily life safety issues, but it was graffiti on buildings and bricks that were falling apart in sidewalks, just places you actually wouldn't want to go.
So you ended up with a parks system that was really, really underfunded and deteriorating badly.
Back in 1995, I was working at WQED as the publisher of Pittsburgh Magazine, and I read an article about the Central Park Conservancy in New York.
I've come to realize through lots of years of public life, when things happen, it's because there is a small group of people, often one person, who is the champion to make things happen, who sort of sees the future.
It seemed like if I and some friends didn't step forward to do something, nobody was going to do anything. So that's how the PPC, Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy, got founded, and we incorporated in December of 1996.
A Parks Conservancy is a nonprofit organization that forms a partnership with city government. It can then raise money from private donors and use it for park improvements. There are more than 100 Parks Conservancies throughout the United States.
The original concept was to try to take Schenley Park and really make it the best it could be, to be a single park conservancy. But that was nixed pretty early on by the city administration.
The mayor's office was adamant. If they were going to work with this new organization, the Parks Conservancy would have to expand its vision to include all 4 of the city's major parks: Schenley Park, Riverview, Highland Park, and Frick Park. This makes the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy unique among its counterparts in other cities that focus primarily on just one park. From the very start, the PPC would pledge to care for more than 1,700 acres across 4 parks. That's more than twice the size of Central Park in New York, and that was just the beginning.
It was very good that we didn't think through every little thing that the Parks Conservancy might have to do or contend with when we were starting out, because we might never have started out.
We started on a philosophy that I dubbed very early the little engine that could. We were going to be action-oriented.
And so, in early 2000, they began work on their first restoration project, the Frick Park Gatehouse. Originally built in 1930 to provide a gorgeous entrance to the park, it had fallen into complete disrepair. It was a small project, but the Conservancy knew they had something to prove.
We could be great at getting things done, at shepherding resources, at being cost-effective and efficient. And bit by bit, we built credibility. It did not come overnight.
After so many years of neglect, there was no shortage of projects for the PPC, and with each successive project, they proved over and over again the formidable expertise they brought to their partnership with the city.
When you think about city government, it is vast and diverse in terms of its responsibilities. They have to do police and fire and public works, potholes and pensions, you name it. All we do is parks. We bring a lot of money and resources and passion and expertise to the table that, again, is beyond the government portfolio, who is doing so many different things and so many very urgent and specific municipal services.
In 2005, the partnership set their sights on the restoration of the beloved Highland Park entry garden. When Highland Park opened in 1898, elegant formal gardens greeted its visitors. But by 2005, the fountain was broken and filled in with dirt.
The paths walking on either side of the fountain to the steps were broken asphalt. So, it wasn't a safe place to walk from point A to point B.
A commitment to the historic design became a hallmark of the ambitious project.
The design was divided into Part A and Part B, one part for the Parks Conservancy and one part for the city.
It was a chance for the city and the PPC to prove to each other that their public-private partnership could work.
There has to be confidence and trust. Just like a marriage, it doesn't work if there's not confidence and trust.
We sat down and talked about what each would do. They raised money for the fountain, the benches, then we worked on the paving of the walkways. The city brought its funding to the project, and the Conservancy brought theirs, and we actually did it.
With the city now a big believer in the strength of their partnership, the Conservancy decided to think big.
Finding a project is not hard, but what you have to do is sniff around and find out who, with some funding to put in, has some ability to put it into any one of your millions of projects. And sometimes you start a ball rolling and then it kind of gets to a plateau, but sometimes you start a ball rolling and it really goes into a home run.
By 2005, the center of Pittsburgh's emerging medical and technical economy was in the Oakland neighborhood, with Pitt on one side and CMU on the other. Smack dab in the middle of it all was a 5-acre parking lot. The PPC historians knew that that prime piece of real estate had originally been deeded to the city for a grand entrance to Schenley Park.
When people found out that that was actually part of the park, they were kind of outraged and said, give me back my park.
A coalition formed to back the project, including the Allegheny Conference, the city's premier advocacy group for economic development. But not everyone jumped on board.
First, our parking authority said you're going to take 600 parking spaces that generating X millions of dollars out of our budget to turn it into a park. And then I got 600 really nasty letters from people saying, where am I going to park? Oakland is the worst place in the city in which to park.
The University of Pittsburgh joined in with their support, and together they raised over $13 million. The city was finally convinced to make the leap of faith, and the project took off.
The Parks Conservancy delivered spectacularly well on creating that park.
Schenley Plaza is indeed iconic, not just for the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy, but for the city of Pittsburgh. The best way to see that is just go there on a beautiful day, and it's just packed with people.
But a park like Schenley Plaza requires care and attention well beyond the day you cut the ribbon.
People think, parks, you just cut the grass and go home. Well, if you're trying to do something any more than that, you need more money. The idea was to build in a revenue stream right from the beginning. And the idea of a restaurant and food kiosks was kind of a beautiful way to solve that, because it was what people wanted anyway.
The Parks Conservancy manages Schenley Plaza on behalf of the city. They make sure that all the revenue and rent from its vendors is put back into the park.
We still do subsidize it as an organization, but in a much smaller manner than if we didn't have these forward-thinking revenue streams established.
Success breeds success. As the years rolled on, the city encouraged the PPC to work their magic in more and more parks. In the midst of all this activity, a new challenge came their way.
Environmental education has been happening in Frick Park for almost 100 years. This park space was conceptualized as an outdoor classroom for all children in Pittsburgh to be able to enjoy and to be able to learn.
The old Environmental Center was a shabby but much-loved building well known to generations of students throughout the city.
The Frick Environmental Center, it was not on our list of projects, but then it burned in 2002.
Confronted by this burnt-out wreck, the Parks Conservancy rose to the challenge. And then, in true PPC fashion, they aimed high. What they built was an entirely sustainable building that provides its own energy and recycles its own wastewater. It is surrounded by 100 acres of gardens and fountains and forest escapes that the Conservancy tends year after year. The center is completely open to the public and also welcomes more than 5,000 students every year to its educational programs led by PPC staff.
It's important for us to be beyond the field trip model. A lot of times, children and students will take field trips and they'll go to a park once and they're done. Great experience, but that's not what we do.
We are sharing experiences with them at least 3 times in the year. We want them to get to know the space on their own terms that they can continue to build on after they see us.
Like maybe Luke's is like the beginning of the life cycle and this worm is like the end.
The more that we can share that parks belong to everyone and they are part of this public commons, I think the more that we can begin to lift people up.
Since its inception, the Parks Conservancy has asserted that parks are and must continue to be the most democratic spaces in American society, free and open to all the people. To truly live up to that principle, the Parks Conservancy is focusing more and more of their efforts towards the city's smaller neighborhood parks. Cliffside Park had a spectacular location, perched high up in the Hill District neighborhood overlooking downtown Pittsburgh, but it had been in a steady state of decline for years.
The park was careworn. It had old play furniture. It had an entrance that was really challenging.
The first step in the restoration process was to find out the hopes and concerns of the Hill District residents and its community organizations.
We wanted to hear what people think about their parks. We didn't want to presume that we knew what was best.
The trust and the partnership and the true collaboration came over time when we had to test each other about our willingness to commit to this project. And they made that relationship and have not walked away from the Hill since that day.
Everyone agreed early on to give the park a new name.
So right around the corner is August Wilson's house. And so the idea of thinking about the Hill as one of the cultural meccas in Pittsburgh was important.
And so, Cliffside Park became August Wilson Park and was restored to the neighborhood in 2016.
And now people see this as a space where the grass is cut, and the flowers are attended to, and the trees are looked after, that it's about a commitment to the space on every level.
Even with all the work the city and the Parks Conservancy have accomplished together, there remains lots to do in such a huge park system.
At this point, we've worked in more than 20 parks. There are 165.
You have very small little green footprints to massive 600-acre woods.
It's an ongoing question how we can best combine with the city and the community to make sure that all the parks in all the neighborhoods are brought up to the level we'd like to see.
The Conservancy embraced the challenge of expanding its efforts to all 165 parks. But first, they needed to know the scope of the task.
We've estimated that there's a $400 million backlog just to get parks up to good condition. And that backlog increases by about $30 million every year. $400 million is a big number. Compare this to the city of Pittsburgh budget, which is about $600 million. So if we said, hey, let's just fix it, it's impossible. So this is an effort that needed long-term solutions.
Were the people of Pittsburgh prepared to make that kind of investment in their parks? The Conservancy launched a listening tour to find out. Over the course of a year, they met with more than 80 community organizations to talk parks.
The thing we heard that didn't surprise us was that people love parks, that they love green space, that they want theirs improved. Not necessarily green space improved on the other side of the city, but in their neighborhood.
What did surprise them was that many folks appeared to like the idea of raising their own taxes to fund those improvements.
People like their parks, and always in the back of our minds, the notion that people would be supportive of, the voters would be supportive of a parks tax if they knew the money was going to be well spent, was going to be truly devoted to improving the parks.
The referendum was put on the ballot in 2019, and the voters gave it a resounding yes.
They want the city to make the parks a first-class, world-class amenity.
I think it's part of that healthy, sustainable cycle that once you have something nice and you see how nice it can be, that you want to invest money in that.
People just respond viscerally in a very happy, good way to parks. And I think what the Parks Conservancy has done is to kind of focus that energy and help people realize how important the parks are to them and to the rest of the community.
But it is a long road between passage of the parks tax referendum and getting shovels in the ground on any improvement project.
So right now, the city of Pittsburgh is controlling all those funds and will continue to do so. That's the role of elected officials, to control and direct tax money. We are working with our partners in City Hall so that we can be that partner with them and take the expertise that we've demonstrated over the last 25 years and expand it.
The Parks Conservancy has put together a roadmap for their ongoing partnership with the city. They call it the Equitable Investment Strategy.
Our goal as an organization, and my personal goal, is that safe, beautiful, accessible green space is available to everyone across the city of Pittsburgh. That this is something that children and families have access to within a 10-minute walk. You don't have to drive across town, you don't have to get a bus, you don't have to go to a special program, that you have this in your neighborhood.
Every child deserves and needs nature. Every human deserves and needs great parks. When people begin to care, they're not going to let the city not care, because they're going to be knocking on the doors and they're going to be saying, hey, you need to invest in these spaces because they're so important to my family, so important to my children, so important to me.
That's the gift of the Parks Conservancy, is that they can give the next generation of kids these beautiful spaces. It'll be a generation of kids who will grow up knowing every space looks this beautiful and they deserve to have it.